How's it going, everybody? This is Andy Morales, and welcome to episode number 4 of Unraveled Influence Season 8. My guest is Jenifer Fox, who's also the author of My West. How are you?
Hey, I'm great, thank you.
So, I always ask everybody these questions, and you're no different, of course. So, how did poetry and writing start for you?
Wow. I think I was one of those people who was always into books and writing and started writing poetry when I was in high school as a way to express sort of the deep and tornadic field of emotions that were inside of me.
Mm.
That's really how I dealt with all the feelings I had. I just was, I'm one of those people who was born with lots of juice inside.
Oh, wow. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
no, I mean, would you like to talk to me more about that? That's interesting.
Sure. My family is e- e- educated, and we had a lot of books in our house, and it was reading was something that was always encouraged with me, and I really liked it. I liked words. I did well in my classes in literature, and so I learned a lot of poetry by reading a lot of poetry growing up. Early into Frank O'Hara, and I wasn't very much into the sort of pre-modern poets. So Emily Dickinson might have caught my eye. I didn't get into those big heavy hitters until I went to graduate school, but I read a lot of poetry, Elizabeth Bishop, a lot of women poets who spoke, just sort of took the thing that she was feeling and seeing and made it just so compact and beautiful. And so I would I would love poetry to read and write it. And honestly, I think one of the things when I got to college and I studied literature, and I read a lot of poetry in college and a lot of plays, was because they were short. And
Okay.
I could get through a lot of it real easily. So yeah, I did. I went to college and was an English major. I taught English to students for about 10 years before I, became a school head, which I did. And I just always had a notebook with me, and everything I saw, I wrote. And I would get a line in my head, like right before going to bed or right when I woke up, and would write it down. And eventually I'd have all these thoughts, and I would just put them together and make a poem.
Wow.
So yeah, I think some of us just are born with talents and interests that we gravitate toward, and they make us feel good. And poetry is one of them. I mean, even the books. When I go to a bookstore, I love to be in the poetry section. It's small and compact, and the books are always really beautiful. I mean, they're like so artfully done, and so I love poetry books too.
Wow. So, okay, because you mentioned a lot of interesting names here too. So I wanted to ask you. So I'm gonna just jump right to this question. What was it about their writing that fascinated you? Like, was it the words? Was it their expression? Was it the way they expressed their sentences? Like, walk me through that. Like, how did that look like for you? And then, when you wrote your first poem, like, what was going through your mind?
So, what I love when I get a poem that I read that I feel like, oh, this is wonderful. It's that they have said in the fewest words, in the most eloquent way, something that I have seen or heard, and they have said it in such a way that no one else has ever put it before. And it's exactly right. So it's that's what I love. That's what makes poetry great to me, is when someone says something I've not ever heard it that way before, but there's something about it that just makes it perfect. And so I think Billy Collins is he's pretty traditional in terms of his popularity and all that, but he tends to do some of that, just make it perfect. And then I also like it when poetry really turns me on when it brings two things that don't seem two disparate ideas together and makes a perfect union of them. And I really like that as well. And so and then I really like recently a lot of poets are really working with form in different ways. And spoken poetry is great, but I really enjoy page, because the page and the spaces and the ink and the that to me is all an art in and of itself that I feel is lost in just spoken word. So I really resonate with the visual of it on a page.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, you have something else too, but I kind of forgot what it was.
Yeah. So my second question was, when you grabbed that piece of paper and wrote your first poem, right? What was going through your mind? How did you feel? Give me the whole shebang.
I remember the poem I wrote. I don't know the first one, but I remember a poem I wrote in high school, and it was 2 lines, and it was, "Hey, Mama, I like your hands. They're tough."
Oh wow! But look, even that right there could go in so many directions now with that one.
And so that poem I wrote in high school on my notebook, and I just always liked that poem and just kept it. And it was so short and simple, and it spoke to me about this teacher that I was having an encounter with. But yeah.
Okay, and I want to ask you about like these poetry formats, because you have brought it up now. So would you consider that just a regular poem, or do you consider it as a micro poem? Like, do you? Because I know there's some people who don't like these terms. Like one of them, like micro poetry. Like, do you believe that's real poetry, or do you think that's just a poem, or do you think that's just too what does that look like for you? But no, I just wanted your opinion on that.
Well, I think that so I'm really trained, right? So in literature, I went to one of the best literature schools in the country, the Breedlove School of English, and so I'm a bit snobby, I have to say, about what makes poetry and what doesn't. And I taught poetry to students for years who struggled with it so much, and this idea that it's whatever you want it to mean, I just can't buy into, right? Because people work very hard to give meaning to something, and if you don't understand it, it just doesn't mean that you can just make it whatever you want. But as far as micro poetry goes, I think that it depends. If it's great, it's great. If it's just lines and you could do more with it, then that will reveal itself in the lack of message, right? The reader will know. Like, the writer can't define what poetry is, as much as the relationship between the reader and the writer is really where the definition lies, I think.
Ooh, that's good. Wow, okay. The relationship between the writer and the reader, and then wow, that's okay. Wow, okay. Wow, that really, you actually just left me speechless right now, because yo, that is deep. Wow. I've never really.
I mean, that's what makes it. That's what makes a poem work. If what I'm trying to do as a writer, and what my intention is received and understood by the reader, and the reader likes that, then that relationship is established and that poem works. If as a writer, as a writer, I'm thinking, oh, it's all about all these things, but my reader never picks that up, and I don't have that relationship, and I fail as a poet. I could say to the end of the day, no, it's this, it means this, but if they don't get it, they don't get it. And same with the reverse. If the reader doesn't understand, what's being said, and other people do, and they miss out, then that relationship isn't established either. So really good poetry is what connects both of those groups.
So I wanted to ask you about poetry, because that's a very interesting thing, right? I've had conversations with other poets in the past as well about just format. Like, talk to me about formats, right? Because I know there's haikus, there's sonnets, there's Oh my god, what was the other one? I just learned another one recently. Contra. Couture. Can't. I forgot the name, but
Canto, a canto.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
that. There's all these things, and then there's also the see. Because when I was growing up, or at least when I was in school, I was always taught that poetry should be written in a stanza, kind of like a couple of lines, whatever, a stanza, space and all this other stuff. I just wanted your input on that because that's pretty interesting. You did talk about pages too earlier, and I wanted to elaborate more on that because that was pretty interesting point that you make.
Yeah, so I feel like, poetry, like any art, is evolving. And so what used to be a rule is now a guideline. And these forms exist and they're great, but if people aren't they don't taste good to people anymore, then there's not a use for them. But there's some great things that people so there's new ways of expressing written poetry that is being put forward, that's coming out. There's this really great book by a recent poetry book. I don't know if you know it, by a poet named Diane Seuss, and
That's
she
not
wrote
that
this.
sounds familiar. Okay.
So she wrote this book called Frank Sonnets, and the whole book are these sonnets, but they're not traditional sonnets. They're a way that she's taken that form and made it her own. And she's also made a novel length book about this guy's life, and every page is in this form. And it's because of the form, like she could have just written a novel about the guy's life, but she makes it so much more artful by putting it into this format that's really thoughtful, and it adds a lot more meaning to the poetry. And she so yeah, I think that form is it's hard, it's a little more difficult. And so I think the people who really can master a form in a way that doesn't feel forced, that the poem feels like you don't really hardly even notice the form, but there it is. That's brilliant to me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that because that's something so different too. And like, let's say like sonnets was always a certain way, but now there's somebody that's pretty much innovating it a little bit different now. Like, oh wait, this is different for a novel, but in a sonnet form. Like that's pretty interesting. And yeah, that's very very interesting. And as I say, I call it what people call it game changer, I guess you can say. But yeah, hold on, give me 1 second. I had a thought, but I didn't because I was so fascinated with what you said. I didn't want to interrupt you. You know what? It'll come back to me. So the next question I wanted to ask was about your book, My West, right? So talk to me about why did you call it My West, the cover art and everything, like how the inspiration came about. Like walk me through that. How did that look like for you?
So I ended up moving. I've lived all over the world, all over the country. I've lived in like 20 states and 2 countries. And I really needed a home and where I was going to just sort of settle down. My job is what took me all over the place. I built schools and turned schools around that were failing. And so I would go to a lot of different schools and live there while I did the job. And
Wow.
so when I decided, well, I really need a home base where when this is over, I can go and do something different. And so I chose Taos, New Mexico. It's a very artsy community. It's a small community where, you can know people wherever you go. It's beautiful. There's great mountains, canyons, lots to do outside, and a lot of good art here. And so when I came here the various times to visit, to make the decision to be here, there's something really magical here. It if you get it, you get it, right? And it's very emotionally beautiful and scenically beautiful, and it just tapped into something really deep inside me, and I knew it was going to be home for me. And so those poems are really about that place and what it meant to me to find a home. And it's about the losses I suffered in getting to this place of feeling as though I've found I found my tribe and my place. So those poems were written really as I was coming into discovering Taos as a home, and then once I got here. And so the one thing is, all the poems show, not all of them, but most of them are describing the beauty of the nature, and then how that nature, the mountains, the canyons, the sunsets, those things, how those things really helped me to find healing in various losses that I've had in my life, and various struggles I've had. And so while those things in my life healed and I grew, that landscape remained the same and the real backbone for me. So some people have in their lives, you know, a parent or a grandparent or a friend who's there, or a partner, a lover who's their rock, who's the person they lean on. And I didn't have that. And so what I had was this landscape that I feel is really mine. It's my West, and the West is my touchstone.
Wow, that is fun. Wow. And that's beautiful. That really is a beautiful thing, right? Because I was having a conversation with another poet on the previous episode, and one of the main things that was pointed out was the fact that home is what you make it. Home is a feeling, not a place. I guess, if that makes sense. And I feel like this is what your feelings were. Like, this is your home, right? Because I feel like, but I also feel like home is what you make it, right? Like, I don't believe ever home is the four walls of your home. Rather, it's where you're most comfortable at, right? Whether it's
That's right.
Right. It's where you find the most peace. Like for example, sometimes I feel at home when I'm with my wife and my son. Like, whether we live in a 1-bedroom apartment or a 3-bedroom apartment, or even we lived in a box, but they're my home, right? And then I'm a born again Christian, so I feel like Jesus is the foundation that keeps us together, type thing. Because without him, I don't feel like we could really manage the way we would have, without him, if that makes sense. And like in your case, that's why you called it My West, and I think that's awesome. Yeah, because you talk about the art and stuff like that. I did want to ask you about the traveling, because that was pretty interesting too. And you said that you were going to different schools, where you would, like, they were failing. Like, talk to me about that, because that's pretty interesting that you were chosen to do that, and then to go to different schools to help them succeed if they were failing. Like, can you walk me through that?
So I really started out as a high school principal in Denver, and I was young. I was like 34 when I got this job, and then that school needed a lot of work. It was just stuck in the past, and it needed to be brought into the future. And so I did that hard work, and then we saw like really good results really early, and then people noticed that I had done that, and then I was asked to come to another school and do it. And then when you do that work, it's really difficult, because you have to usually pull out a lot of weeds, and that's uncomfortable for people.
Wow.
So you're not very loved as a turnaround school head. So I would go to various different places and do this until I finally got a chance to start my own school. And one of the schools I was at was a school in New Jersey, a boarding school for girls who had learning and emotional difficulty. And we were in a training with them and on how to deal with them educationally. And the training lasted for 3 weeks. And one day during the training, they gave us this little workshop about, and you can also like figure out what their strengths are and build on those. And I thought, well, that's the whole program. And so I wrote a book and I wrote a curriculum about it. And I ended up getting that published and getting on a big Penguin published it, and I went on a big tour, and I went around the country. I was on the Today Show. I went around the country speaking about building up people's strengths. Like, schools knock kids down, but what we should really be doing is building on not what they're good at. Like, a strength isn't what you're good at. It's what turns you on, what puts you in the flow. So we should help people find out what their flow is, because once they find that out, they're going to do it, because you spend time doing what you love. And so that's how I ended up. So after that big success, I got to start a school in Arkansas, of all places, and I could make it anything I wanted to. And the guy was a billionaire, and he said, you can make it anything you want, and it doesn't matter what it costs. So I designed a school that was, it had a maker space, and all of the things the kids learned weren't traditional learning. Instead, it's still going, the school, you could look it up, it's called the Delta School. They learn by doing real world projects, and real world problems they tackle to find solutions to them. And so I did that for a while, and then I ended up back here after COVID. I was at another school during COVID, and got really isolated and decided it was time to go home.
Wow. How accomplished did you feel though when you made that school in Arkansas? Because that is wow, that's a big deal to me, because that's wow.
That's that's probably one of the more significant accomplishments of my life. I believe that I feel very proud of that school. I didn't do it myself. I did it with, the guy who had the money was hugely instrumental in making that happen, and a great guy. But I feel like that made a big difference, in people's lives. I also felt the book about the strengths. I still get people calling me and saying that how it helped them. So, I feel like I've done some good things in life.
Wow. No, and that's great. I love that. But I think what I like about this whole thing too, right? Because you talked about the school in Arkansas, and then you talked about how you went to other schools and you went around the world pretty much. And I think one thing that I find interesting, it seems like pretty much you got to see culture in different shapes and different forms in different locations, right? Because I know like one culture in one place is different somewhere else. And I think that's what's interesting about that. I wanted to ask you too, what was it about the culture in every place you were? Like, if there was one thing that was in common, let's say, about each and every one of those cultures, what do you think, in your opinion, would that be?
Why the culture at the school, there's the culture of where I was, and then there's the culture of the school that made it toxic. And I think what makes a school toxic is when people are afraid of change, and they get really comfortable and believing in what they're doing is right, and there's no different way to do it, and they get very afraid of that, so that anyone who comes in to try to change things or challenge that, they end up doing things that are not principled. And
Wow.
so I really believe that most cultures that go astray is because there's people within those systems who are acting out of fear, and their fear drives them to do really unprincipled things, like simple gossip, like gossip and cutting corners, and things like this that are just not in good for growth. And that's what I've seen in most places I've been.
Wow.
Yeah. And people can't see that their very fear of growth is what's ruining it for everybody.
Wow. No, and I love what you said, because see, all right, so I grew up in a Hispanic culture, Hispanic minority-ish culture growing up, especially in schools. So the school system back when I was young, I'm talking about like elementary school, high school, junior high, like this culture was so different than what it is today, right? And I feel like everything you just told me, like you're giving me another perspective, because I always saw things in one perspective because I thought it was always toxic. Because, like, for example, right, I feel like even though kids still get bullied today, but I feel like in some aspects it's worse. In some aspects, some things are getting done about it. Where, opposed to back then, they'll do kind of sort of did something about it, but it was never to that degree of, okay, there was some consequences for your actions, right? Because I felt like if I was complaining all the time about someone bullying me, they would like be, okay, like, you can't keep complaining all the time. You got, like, okay, but you don't want me to fight, you don't want me to defend myself. What do you want me to do then? Like, ignore? Sometimes ignoring is not easy. Like, that struggle is so real. And I think in that same way, you saw what you saw in all these different cultures, and you just could not ignore what was going on. So you felt that change needed to happen, because change is good as long as it benefits everybody, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think there's residual benefit to change that people don't realize, you know. And again, I think most of the problems in the world are really about fear. And I think that the general problem in the world is that there's enough for everybody, but we don't recognize that. And so there's people who don't have, and there's people who have too much. And so I feel as though because of that problem, you know, that's where it all comes from. So, you know, I really believe there's enough for everyone if we did things right.
I definitely agree with you on that, for sure. So I was gonna ask if you mind reading a piece from your book, so we can give the audience an idea of how you write, and then we could talk about the piece and stuff.
Okay, I'll read this one because it's kind of apropos to the season.
Perfect.
This one's called Ephemeral. Autumn approaches in the distance. Brief smoke of pinion rides in on the wind. Small comfort for inevitable loss. Another summer vanishes, slips away in silence, without saying goodbye. Fire-licked September's edges, yellow, orange, red, flare deep in leaf veins. Maple, aspen, elm, ignite ambivalent blaze. Why is it I feel sorrow whenever something leaves? By October, each day outdoes the last. At its apex, it's downright excruciating. Ephemeral flame, like a promise we know will be broken, but we believe it anyway. With sweatered arms, I hug the barrel of bluebird sky, high on incense air, the world too brilliant to bear. Like the spark of first love, knowing it will burn, but we strike the match anyway. I hear the rustle of my destiny. Tomorrow there will be storm clouds, and the trees begin to bare their cold arms.
Whew. Wow. One thing that caught my eye is, why do I feel... Wait, can you repeat that line where it says, when you feel sorrow, you feel bad? Like, can you repeat that line?
Oh, it says, why is it I feel sorrow whenever something leaves?
Yeah, that is, wow.
So this poem was really to me about the way that in the autumn it's so beautiful. If you live in a place, you know, that the colors turn and change and all that.
Yeah.
There's those days where it is just so beautiful you can hardly stand it. And I, in that moment, feel so intense, and I also feel so scared because I know it's going to leave. Like, I know it's going to get cold and snowy, but there's something about that very moment, you know, of realizing that you're in this spot that can't last. But, yeah.
That's actually, that's pretty deep, right? And I think life is like that too, right? Because I think life always comes in seasons, right? And metaphorically speaking, I think it always comes in seasons. And Because there is a Bible verse in Ecclesiastes 3 where it talks about, seasons, and it talks about, there's a time to cry and a time to laugh, time to wage war and time to not to wage war. There's all these things, and I think life is
Uh-huh.
like that, in that way, where it's like at one season certain things were good and made sense, but then once that season was over, now I had to go through a transitional season, because during this, when winter falls turns into fall, it doesn't just go like that, right? Because when I meant to say fall turns into winter. So when fall starts changing to go to the winter, I feel like that change is the transitional season, because now it has to prepare the earth to endure the winter season, if that makes sense. So I feel like life is that same way too, because change is such a difficult thing. It is such a struggle. It is such it's just hard, right? Because I got used to fall. So whatever that fall season represents for you, I feel like once we transition to change is that transitional season, because that means you have to start letting go of some things just so you can
Right.
start going into the next season, because sometimes there's certain things in the seasons that can't come with you to the next season, that you kind of have to leave it there,
Well,
because
that's why,
yeah.
like, the stanza in the poem says, like the spark of first love, knowing it will burn, but we strike the match anyway.
Yeah, I love that. Strike the match anyway. Oh,
Because,
that's wow.
it's rare, and I have it in my family. My brother married his first love and is with her happily ever after, but that's a very rare occurrence to,
Yeah,
it's almost like that it's not going to work out forever, but you got to go in and do it anyway, because
yeah,
even if it doesn't last forever, it's worth it doing it now.
yeah. No, and that's
Yeah.
very important.
I have a hard time reading poetry out loud because it's really internal for me. So, because I read it, right? I know that spoken word is a big thing, and my poetry isn't spoken word poetry. But what you don't see is, when you hear it without seeing it, is where the line breaks are, and how the line breaks will, add meaning, or add more meaning, or add a double entendre or something that you wouldn't get if you didn't know. So
Right.
yeah, so there's that
No,
piece of
no,
it.
and that's no, no, and that's it. That makes sense. Yeah, I get what you're saying, because, I can't memorize poems for the life of me. I could try, but I just cannot. I'm the guy that has to have the piece of paper. I just hate when, like, I wish a lot of in person open mics would do this, and I feel like they don't do this, where not everybody's gonna memorize their poems. So why would you not have a podium or a music sheet holder or something to put in front of them, so they don't have to hold the paper in their hand? So then
Yeah,
that way they can have better eye contact, or where they have the phone on their hand. Because I've seen open mics online where they're reciting the poetry really, really good, like very, like, oh my god, you feel it, but it's so embarrassing when they have to have the phone in their hand and they're constantly looking at the phone
it
left to
feels really
right.
that's interesting you say that, because I feel like if they had a piece of paper, it would feel a little more natural than looking at the phone. Just gives it a weird sort of commercialized, or like like they just looked it up, right? They didn't really do it or something.
It's
Phone ex-
so true. It's so true. It's so true. Yeah, it's so true, because it's crazy. Because I'm like, okay, you trying to sell me your phone, like, or like I seen one online where somebody had a tablet on them. I'm like, oh man, like this is why places need to have a podium. Like that's why when for those who don't know, Unraveled Influence is having our first in person open mic on October 20th. That's on a Friday. That's next Friday. And I that's one thing I told my Angela. I said, Angela, make sure we get a music sheet or or something, so they could lay the phone down, or they could leave the paper on there, because to have it in their hand and on the mic, I think that's embarrassing. I'm like, okay, let's take notes.
Yeah, that's good. I think that would be really helpful to people. It's good to think about, how to make it seem better, and break the mold a little bit.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Oh my god! And the event is free if anyone's interested. It's free. But yeah, but it's interesting though because I see that I'm just like, I feel so, but I still enjoy the piece. But I feel like it's just embarrassing to have that piece of paper because either you're showing me a flyer of advertisement or you're trying to sell me your phone. So that's how I feel. I'm like why do these places not put a podium or just something, just something like come on, like a song sheet holder, whatever it is, just put it. Like come on, like but yeah, but neither here nor there. So but I do agree. I feel like when I say if I don't see the poem, like you said, but then you're reading it and you don't see the like you was just saying just now. I think that's awesome that because then you get a sense of feel for the piece as well, and you can
Well,
visualize it better as well.
there's also things that people don't, get that are like where a line leaves off and the other line picks up. Where it stops, it changes the meaning of the word, and it can mean multiple things, and you miss that because you don't see that line break, right? So there's that happens when you don't see it on the page.
Right. No, it makes sense. And I do wanted to ask you about a piece that you had on this book where called Where I Belong. I wanted to ask you about that.
Okay.
So I don't know, so if you want to read it and then we can talk about the piece.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hold on, let me get that one. Okay. Where I Belong. The canyon rises, raspberry ribbon layers, a cake baked in the oven of the noonday sun. Lavender ledges stacked against the blue sheet impossible sky. 100 million years etched in ancient seawall. Deltas return to dust. Everything evaporates, loses form, and becomes something new and unrecognizable. Rusted cliff face bleeds into crystalline river. Rock returns to water. This is the place of my everything, where my heart sings desert song. Fire, water, earth, sun, the place where I belong.
Wow. I love that. Talk to me about that piece because I love that, especially the part where it says, "This is where my heart sings desert song, fire, water, earth, and sun, the place where I belong." I love that. Can you talk to me about that? Because that is wow, that's deep.
So there are these fantastic vistas here and canyons, and it's just when you look at it, you realize that this has been here since before people. This has been here, and it's been an ocean at one time. You can see little crustaceans in the rock, and just to look at it and think that, and to think that all of that time that has passed, all those things from going from an ocean to a canyon to eventually that will all crumble down, and that whole sense of everythingness in looking just at that canyon and seeing that beauty is really what I love. And the elements, fire, water, earth, sun. Sun isn't an element, but wind didn't really go with the rhythm, so I didn't use that word. They're all there, and they're all there at once. And I just feel like this is really where, when I'm in this place and in this landscape, I can feel all of that, right? Like all the elements, all the history that's been here, of man, of landscape, of animals, of everything. And I just, because there's not many places I've been where I can just look at the scenery and feel that much.
Wow.
and have that much experience. But I do when I'm here. And so I feel like, well, if that's how I'm feeling here, then this is definitely where I belong.
Makes sense. It's true. Like for me, I feel like there's something about nature though that amazes me, right? Because I love nature, but I also love the architecture of life, right? Like when I
Mm-hmm.
see a building, when I see a skyscraper, or when I see a house built a certain way, especially like in Brooklyn now these days, Williamsburg. So the way they build houses now is not like they used to. It's not like a townhouse anymore, or like they'll take something that used to be a townhouse, either they'll demolish it or they'll renovate it, the inside and out, and it'll look kind of wacky sometimes. But yet it fascinates me because I'm like, how did you do it to make it look a certain way, right? Because they'll do this where, oh well, we have this window, but the window was tilted on purpose. Like that's the way they designed this house, and I'm just like, wait, what do you mean the window's tilted? Like that makes no sense. So how does the person supposed to open the window? Like
Mm-hmm.
sideways? Like it's just weird to me, right? But yet it's fascinating because I see all these new things, I see all these new dynamics, and I'm just like it's something about the way it's built, and I feel like life is like that too. I feel like it's like that with nature too, right? Because when nature takes its course, despite all that, then it's like the fact that these buildings and these things that are built around us, they still stay, right? But in some cases that's not the case. Like if you live in an area where like volcanoes exist, and then whatever you built, the volcano erupts, then it's like, damn, so what you worked hard for gets demolished. Or when you have these hurricanes that exist, it gets demolished, you know? So I don't know, for some reason I feel like when that kind of stuff happens, it makes me sad because I always think about the hard work that the person or the people have put.
Well, that's very interesting you say that, because that's kind of like this poem, you know, it's like everything's always, the minute it's there, it's deteriorating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And eventually everything will be gone. Sometimes when I do so, I'm a painter as well, and sometimes when I paint something, I think, what's the use of this? Someday the earth is going to be like a blade, all on fire and blow up, and everything will be gone. So like, what's the use of it? What's the use of anything? It's all going to go away.
Right. But you know what's crazy though? But so much shit, because we were talking about change as well. It's so interesting how life has changed dramatically, right? I was talking to another poet that they were talking about how everything's at the fingertips now, which is
Yeah.
crazy. Like back then, there was no. Oh, I'm gonna watch a video on YouTube. It's either you had a portable TV, or which not everybody had one of those, or you had a portable DVD player, which not everybody had, but it existed if you wanted to get it. Then the phone was in your pocket, and then you had a CD player. Everybody had a CD player, or everybody had a cassette player. Now all this is in one database. Like
Right.
even infrastructure in that way I'm fascinated with, right? Like Spotify. Okay, there's all this database. How do you the hard work they had to do, the coding they had to do to create this app to grab wherever they get their database from to get all the music. Like to me that's fascinating. That is crazy. But then, like you said, it eventually gets messed up. So let's say, like, oh, at least back in the '90s when files got corrupted, that was it. Like, there was no way to retrieve that. Now there's all these softwares to retrieve a file that got messed up.
Well, what's really interesting to me about that is that so the architecture part is fascinating, and then it's like, where is, so we didn't know, you know, before the, let's just say the iPhone is an example, we didn't know, we couldn't even imagine that, right? Yet that whole architecture, that whole idea existed in the universe somewhere before it got into someone's head. And so it's like, where's all the things that we're going to invent that we might not see because we won't live that long,
Mm,
that will totally revolutionize life, to change it so that we won't recognize that all those ideas are somewhere right now,
yeah.
right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
inventions are living in, they're living somewhere. They're not in people, and they're not becoming things yet, but they're in our universe.
Yeah.
I think that's really a fascinating, you know, idea.
No, I definitely agree with you on that one because it's so true. Like it's interesting, right? Because somebody told me something interesting. I don't know how true this is, but they say like all the stuff we have now, like the iPhones and the all these things that we carry. Oh well, that's been around since for a longer time than we've been around. We're just hearing about it right now. But I'm like, I guess like because they were trying. they're trying to say like in the army, this is what they had. They just never told
Oh,
nobody about it. Like this is.
yeah, I don't believe that.
I don't believe that either, but I've had people tell me that, and I'm just like, okay, but there was never any proof
I think they
insinuating
had,
that.
I think the one thing that's true is that I think there were electric cars a long time ago. I mean, I know that there
Yeah.
were probably as early as the 50s, there was an electric car, but, but they don't, that was kept from market, but,
So I also wanted to talk about your poetry as far as fishing the Rio de Pueblo and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and then the other one, La Jicarita. Is that how, am I pronouncing
Oh,
that right?
La Jicarita. Yeah,
Okay.
so New Mexico is a very diverse, heavily influenced by Spanish American, or not Spanish American, Spaniards. So they came here and helped the white man take over. So we have the native culture is here, the native tribes are here, and the Spanish were here before the white men. So there's a lot of Hispanics here, and that is La Jicarita is the name of it.
Okay, and I understand they those two poems won first and second place in the 2020 Southwestern Poetry Society. So I just want to know, I wanted to ask you about that too because I think that's awesome that it won first and second place. Can you talk to me about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I was writing these poems for this book, and I someone said to me, "Hey, there's this contest you should enter," and I said, "I'm not really into. I don't like contests very much," but I said, "Okay, I'll enter." So I entered, and then I got an email. I actually won first, second, and third place with another poem that is not in this collection. And I the thing was in Arizona or something, and they were like, "Oh, you have to come over." I got sick and couldn't go, but I got money. They paid
Nice.
me like cash for writing poems. It was really fun. It was funny. I was very surprised, and of course, I thought, well, how many poems were in the contest? 3.
Wow.
They
Wow,
said
that's
there were a
amazing.
lot more, but yeah, I, my poetry. It was a Southwestern society, and so they were looking for theme-based poems that were theme-based on the Southwest, and those 3 poems were really pretty much about the local area.
Okay. No, that's cool. That's very, very cool. And I wanted to ask you about just your book overall. So we covered a lot from this book and from your life. And I wanted to ask you, so how did you get in as far as like Quillkeepers Press and all that stuff? Like how did that happen?
Well, when I had written enough that I thought, wow, this is a collection. I took it to a place where I thought, wow, I really want people to read this. I have been putting my poems up on Facebook every now and then, and my friends were all like, this is so good. You have to write a book. We love this. And so when I realized that there was an audience, albeit small, I thought, well, I'll see if I can get it published. So I sent it out to a number of different places, and I had 4 publishers come back and say, yeah, we'll publish it. But Quillkeepers was first, and they are great, by the way.
Right.
They are just so personable and so nice, and were so lovely about publishing it. And one thing happened: I got sick after it came out, and so I'm just actually now starting to promote it more. But I've also completed a series of paintings about Western paintings. And so the book and the paintings I'm putting in sort of a little marketing package together. But yeah, the Quillkeepers Press is some real fun people over there. They
Nice.
they are promoting poetry, which is a very not a lucrative business, but it's definitely a riches of the soul. So
No, I definitely agree
um,
with you. I get you. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. And I think even though it's not lucrative, but I think it's like they say about a college degree. It's not what it gets you, but what you could do with it. That's what like one of my cousins told me one time. And I think in that same way with poetry, it's not what it does for you, but what you could do with it, if that makes sense. And I think you writing this book, right? I look at it as, hey, it's a relatable thing. Hey, maybe this could be a survival guide for somebody that didn't know that, oh, somebody else is going through the same thing I'm going through. I look at it and be like, oh wow, this is how I feel, kind of thing, right? And I think that's what makes it powerful too, right? Because poetry comes in different shapes and forms for sure, but I definitely think like you said, if we had more that was just poetry based and you know really out there, I think you know I think it could be lucrative. I think it could definitely make an impact for sure. And we are heading towards the end, so I always ask everybody this, and I'm gonna ask you now. So once you're not in this life anymore, when somebody hears Jennifer Fox, what is what are the few things you want people to remember you by, and what lasting impact you hope to leave?
Well, I think that the people who know me and some who don't would say that that I'm very generous, and I get that from my father. Um, I give a lot, and a lot of my if I have money, I give it to people if they need it. If I have things, I give them to people rather than sell them. So I give my home out. And with my art, that's a giving act as well. So I think that I'd like to be known for that. I was generous, that I received great riches in my life in terms of health and experience, and that I am not, I turn around and shared that with other people. Um, so I'd like to be remembered by being a generous person. And I hope that, you know, my artwork survives me in that in the writings that I put out. I think people pick it up and they get something from it, and that's really all that matters to me.
Amen. 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 Amen to that word. Thank you so much. So again, like I said, we are towards the end. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Jennifer, for trusting us with your story, for allowing us to have this great conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for listening to this episode.